this video, I'd like to get you to think outside the bezel box zone for setting stones. There are many ways to set stones other than the normal smooth bezels. Let's look at 19 different examples of 1. Alterations and additions to bezels, 2. Substitutes for bezels, and 3. Other methods to hold settings including riveting and pressure setting. I'm Greenwood. Welcome to my studio. Here is our normal smooth bezel. It has been used for centuries to hold stones, and it works beautifully. Let's start making some alterations to the basic bezel. This stone had uneven sides, and the bezel had to be sculpted to match the uneven sides, so a slight alteration to the bezel. This stone has sharp corners, so the bezel has been altered at those corners to accommodate those sharper edges. This gives an interesting look to the bezel. This bezel has been altered by drilling holes into the bezel wire itself. Gives kind of a nice light, airy look. This bezel has been altered by adding other pieces of bezel wire to the bezel wire itself. Small pieces have been soldered all the way around onto the bezel wire to give it that three-dimensional look. This bezel has been made by cutting out pieces of bezel wire and soldering them together and doing a little engraving on them. This bezel has been altered by crimping it and soldering it to the back sheet and then pushing the inner crimps against the stone. Kind of an interesting industrial look. This bezel has been altered by sawing it with a jeweler's saw and matching the patterns that are in the stone itself. Let's take a look at some substitutes for bezels. The bezel wire here has been substituted with jump rings that have been soldered together, and you'll notice that this stone has actually been lifted from the inside with a smaller ring underneath it, which gives it a nice three-dimensional quality. This bezel has been substituted with half jump rings. With this substitution, the wire has been crimped and used as the bezel. You'll notice that there are domed pieces underneath to lift the stone up, again to give it a 3D quality. This bezel has been substituted with a wild and crazy wire that reflects the patterns in the stone. Let's take a look at the other side of this stone also. You don't always have to be setting a cabochon stone. This is an acrylic sphere using that same technique of the wire bezels. Other methods to hold settings include riveting and pressure settings. Let's take a look at a few of those. This method is actually sandwiching the stone in between two pieces of sheet silver. Because you can't use heat on it, it'll ruin the stone. You can use rivets to hold the pieces together. Nice cold process, works out effectively. Here's another example of using a rivet to set this ceramic bead. The rivet goes all the way through the bead and is mushroomed on the back side. This riveting method goes all the way through the stone and holds sterling silver wires on to complete the design. This method is taking advantage of the hole that goes through the middle of the stone. Instead of using a solid rivet, this is using a tube that's been flared out to act like a rivet that will hold the stone in position. This method is using a rivet that it goes through the sterling silver cylinder that holds the acrylic rods. Hole was drilled through the cylinder and the acrylic rods and inserted to hold them in position. This stone is held in position by a pressure setting technique. There are 4 rings soldered together on the bottom of the stone, and the 4 prongs coming up with the spheres on them hold the stone in position. This acrylic sphere is held between two domed pieces of sterling silver, and the forged wire is what is applying the pressure to the sphere to hold it in position. You can see there are many, many different ways to set stones, and we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. I hope this has been an inspiration for you to think outside the box for your stone settings. Use your imaginations and you will be surprised at your results. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm Greg Greenwood, and see you next time.